Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight, we're talking about small towns in Alaska. You know, those tiny places where everyone knows everyone. But what these stories will show you is that sometimes, knowing your neighbors is the last thing you want. We've got 8 true stories from regular people who moved to Alaska for work. We're talking about mail carriers, store workers, mechanics, and radio DJs. Just normal folks trying to make a living. But they found something in these small towns that they weren't expecting. Something wrong, something scary. Some discovered their whole town was hiding a terrible secret. Others realized their friendly boss had dark plans for them. And a few learned that the people walking around town weren't really people at all. These are real accounts from workers who survived to tell their stories. If you're new here, subscribe to Mr. Midnight because I bring you true horror stories that actually happened. Hit the bell so you don't miss any videos. Trust me, after tonight, you'll think twice before taking a job in the middle of nowhere. Let's get started. My name is Jake Morrison, and I worked as a hunting guide in Coldfoot, Alaska for 3 seasons. I got my Alaska guide license when I turned 21, certified in wilderness first aid, and spent every fall season taking hunters into the Brooks Range to help pay for my engineering degree at UAF. I knew that country like the back of my hand. Every creek, every ridge, every game trail, from the Dalton Highway to the gates of the Arctic. I'd guided dozens of hunters through caribou season without a single incident. But what happened during my last trip in October 2019 made me realize that the most dangerous predators in Alaska walk on 2 legs. It was October 15th when I got the call from Wilderness Outfitters about 3 hunters from Texas wanting a 5-day caribou hunt. The season was winding down, and I needed the money for spring tuition. The clients, Dave Russo, Mike Hendricks, Dave Russo, and Ron Martinez, seemed normal enough over the phone. They had their licenses, said they'd hunted deer in Texas, and wanted the full Alaska experience. They were flying into Fairbanks and driving up the Dalton Highway to meet me at Coldfoot. When they arrived that Tuesday morning, they looked the part. Expensive Sitka gear, brand new Weatherby rifles, and enough equipment for a month-long expedition. Mike was the talker, maybe 45 with silver hair and a firm handshake. Dave was younger, quiet, always checking his phone even though we barely had signal. Ron was the biggest, looked like he could field dress a moose with his bare hands. They paid cash up front, $3,000, no questions asked. We loaded up my Toyota Tundra and headed into the Brooks Range on the Chandalar River Trail. The fall colors were perfect, and the weather forecast looked good for the next 5 days. I figured it would be an easy hunt. The caribou were moving through, and these guys seemed to know their way around firearms. But by the first night, something felt off. While I was setting up camp at Timber Creek, I noticed Dave wasn't paying attention to the caribou sign I was showing them. Instead, he was taking pictures of our campsite from different angles, measuring distances between trees with a rangefinder. When I asked what he was doing, he laughed it off. Just documenting everything for my wife back home. She wanted to see where we'd be staying. Mike spent the evening asking weird questions about the area. How many people came through here during hunting season? Were there any cabins or shelters nearby? How far to the nearest road? When was the last time I saw park rangers or other hunters? I figured they were just city guys nervous about being so far from civilization, so I tried to reassure them about safety protocols and emergency procedures. The second day, things got stranger. We'd been glassing for caribou from a ridge when I caught Dave marking GPS coordinates in a notebook. Not hunting spots, East 4, just random locations along our route. When I asked to see his notes, he quickly put the notebook away and said he was keeping a journal for the trip. That afternoon, while the 3 of them were supposedly scouting ahead, I found Mike's backpack unattended. His satellite phone was visible in the side pocket, APP, a high-end Iridium unit that cost more than my truck. When he got back, I mentioned that he'd said he wanted a disconnected experience without cell phones. Mike's whole demeanor changed for a second. Then he smiled and said the sat phone was just for emergencies. The third day, everything started falling apart. We'd been tracking a small herd when Ron made a perfect shot on a bull caribou at 200 yards. But when we got to the animal, Ron field dressed it like a professional butcher. Not like a weekend hunter from Texas, ready to have it, like someone who'd done this hundreds of times. His knife work was surgical, efficient, and he knew exactly where to make every cut without hesitation. Dave took photos of the entire process from multiple angles, which seemed excessive for a hunting trophy. That evening, while they thought I was gathering firewood, I overheard them talking in low voices near their tent. Mike was saying something about the package and cleanup protocols. Dave mentioned coordinates and asked if they were still good for collection. Ron said something about the others and how they needed to stick to the timeline. My stomach dropped. These weren't hunters. I checked their hunting licenses that night while they slept. The license numbers were fake. I'd memorized the format from years of guiding, and these didn't match the state database pattern. Their business cards had phone numbers that went straight to disconnected lines. Everything about their identities was manufactured. The fourth morning, I told them I was ending the hunt early due to weather concerns. Mike's response chilled me to the bone. He smiled and said they'd pay me an extra $5,000 to continue the trip. When I insisted we needed to head back, Dave casually mentioned they were expecting to collect something at specific GPS coordinates about 10 miles north. I recognized those coordinates. 3 weeks earlier, a solo hiker named Timothy Chen had gone missing in that exact area. Search and rescue had found his abandoned camp, but no sign of him. The case was still open. My hands started shaking as I realized what was happening. These men weren't hunting caribou. They were hunting people. We reached Chen's last known campsite that afternoon. His tent was still there, collapsed and torn. Personal belongings were scattered around, a sleeping bag with dark stains, a broken hiking pole, and his journal lying open to entries about feeling watched and followed. Instead of reporting the scene or calling for help, the three men began photographing everything methodically. Dave took measurements and marked GPS points, while Ron collected items and put them in garbage bags. Mike noticed my horrified expression and put his hand on my shoulder. "You're a smart kid, Jake. You understand the situation now." His voice was calm, almost friendly. "We've been doing this for years. Wilderness deaths look like accidents, and bodies disappear in this country. We've used guides like you in 12 different locations across Alaska and Western Canada." My blood turned to ice. They were serial killers, and I was supposed to be victim number 13. Dave explained their system with disturbing pride. They researched remote hunting areas, hired local guides who knew the territory, and used hunting trips as cover to access isolated victims like solo hikers or campers. After each kill, they staged the scene to look like animal attacks or exposure deaths. The wilderness did the rest. Scavengers, weather, and time erased the evidence. "Your death will be a hunting accident," Ron said matter-of-factly. "Rifle misfire while cleaning your gun. Happens all the time. We'll hike out, drive back to Fairbanks, and fly home. By the time anyone finds you, we'll be long gone." I forced myself to stay calm and act like I was going along with their plan. That night, while they slept, I grabbed my survival pack and slipped away from camp. I knew the country, and they didn't. If I could reach the Chandalar River, I might find other hunters or a way to signal for help. But 30 minutes into my escape, a sudden snow squall hit the mountains. The temperature dropped 20 degrees, and visibility went to 0. I lost the trail and found myself stumbling through thick brush in complete darkness. Behind me, I could hear voices and see flashlight beams. They were tracking me with night vision goggles and GPS units. I fell through ice-covered rocks into Timber Creek and soaked my legs up to the knees. In October, above the Arctic Circle, wet clothes meant death. I was already losing feeling in my feet when hypothermia started setting in. My core temperature was dropping fast, and I was beginning to lose coordination. Just when I thought I was finished, I stumbled onto an old trapper's cabin hidden in a grove of black spruce. The door was unlocked, and I barricaded myself inside with furniture and firewood. The cabin was ancient but solid, with a small wood stove and basic supplies. I got a fire going and started warming up, but I could hear the killers outside, testing the walls and trying to find a way in. That's when I made the most horrifying discovery of my life. The cabin had a root cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the floor. When I opened it to look for more firewood, my flashlight revealed piles of personal belongings, wallets, driver's licenses, jewelry, and clothing from dozens of people. The items were organized by date, going back years. I found Timothy Chen's wallet and ID, along with belongings from hikers, hunters, and campers from across Alaska and Canada. These killers had been operating for over a decade. Among the items, I found Chen's journal. His final entries described meeting 3 friendly hunters who offered to share their camp. He wrote about feeling uneasy when they asked too many questions about his route and schedule. The last entry was dated the day he disappeared. "Something's wrong. They know too much about me. If anything happens, look for 3 men from Texas using hunting trips as cover." The killers were trying to burn me out now. I could smell smoke and hear them stacking brush against the cabin walls. But Chen's journal mentioned an old mining tunnel that connected to the root cellar. I found the entrance hidden behind stacks of victim belongings and squeezed into a narrow passage that led away from the cabin. The tunnel was a nightmare, barely wide enough for my shoulders, filled with spider webs and the smell of decay. But it saved my life. I crawled through 50 yards of hell and emerged in a thicket of willows just as the cabin exploded into flames behind me. I was wearing clothes taken from the root cellar, a dead man's wool jacket, and insulated boots that were too big but kept my feet from freezing. The temperature was 20 below, and I had no shelter, no food, and no way to signal for help. The killers were hunting me with professional equipment while I was surviving on luck and stolen clothes from their victims. But I found something else in that root cellar, an old shortwave radio that still worked. I managed to contact a bush pilot named Bill Crawford who flew supplies to remote camps. I told him my location and situation in broken, desperate transmissions before the battery died. The killers heard my radio call and knew help was coming. They found my tracks leading away from the burned cabin and started their final hunt. I could hear them coordinating on radio communications as they closed in on my position. I spent 8 hours hiding in a snow cave. I dug under a fallen tree, wearing dead men's clothes and fighting hypothermia, while 3 serial killers searched for me with night vision and thermal imaging equipment. Every time I heard their voices getting closer, I thought about all those belongings in the root cellar and how many families never knew what really happened to their loved ones. Just as hypothermia was winning the battle, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world: helicopter rotors. Bill Crawford had contacted the Alaska State Troopers, and they were flying in with a tactical team. The killers tried to run, but there's nowhere to hide from helicopters in open tundra. They arrested Mike Hendricks, Dave Russo, and Ron Martinez 3 miles from my position. In their equipment, troopers found detailed files on hunting guides across Alaska and Western Canada, fake identification documents, professional surveillance gear, and a kill list with my name already added as victim number 13. The investigation revealed they'd murdered at least 15 people over 8 years, using hunting trips and wilderness access to target isolated victims. They had detailed profiles on dozens of guides and had planned murders in locations across Montana, Wyoming, and British Columbia. I testified at their trial, describing how they used my professional knowledge against me and turned my workplace into their hunting ground. All 3 received life sentences without possibility of parole. The families of their victims finally had answers, but those answers came with the terrible knowledge of how their loved ones really died. I never worked as a guide again. The frostbite cost me 3 toes, and the PTSD made it impossible to return to the wilderness I'd once loved. I finished my engineering degree and moved to Seattle, but I still wake up some nights thinking about that root cellar full of belongings and wondering how many other victims they had scattered across the wilderness. I started a foundation to help train guides and outdoor professionals about recognizing dangerous clients and trusting their instincts when something feels wrong. Because in Alaska's wilderness, the most dangerous predators don't have claws or fangs, they have hunting licenses and friendly smiles. That cabin saved my life, but it also showed me something I can never forget. For every missing person whose disappearance remains a mystery, there might be 3 smiling strangers who know exactly what happened and are already planning their next hunt. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been working retail for 12 years. I started as a cashier at 16, worked my way up to assistant manager at a big box store, and handled everything from Black Friday crowds to armed robberies. I thought I'd seen every type of customer, every workplace drama, every situation a store could throw at me. But what happened during my 8 weeks in Circle, Alaska changed everything I thought I knew about trust, safety, and the people who promised to protect us. After my divorce went through in March, I needed to get as far away from Phoenix as possible. My ex-husband had made my life hell for 2 years, and even after the restraining order, I kept seeing his truck parked outside my apartment. When I found a job posting for a general store clerk in Circle, Alaska, population 104, it seemed perfect. Remote, quiet, and 2,000 miles from my problems. The Midnight Sun General Store sat right on the Alaska Highway, serving the handful of locals and the occasional trucker or tourist brave enough to drive that lonely stretch of road. The posting said they provided housing, which was perfect since I had exactly $800 to my name after the legal fees. Tom Bradley owned the store and had run it for 15 years. He was maybe 50, average height, with graying hair and the kind of soft-spoken manner that immediately put you at ease. During our phone interview, he asked about my retail experience, but also seemed genuinely concerned about my personal situation. "You sound like you've been through a lot," he said. "Circle's a good place to start over. People here look out for each other." He offered me the job at $18 an hour, more than I'd made in Phoenix, plus free rent in the apartment above the store. I could start immediately if I could get myself to Alaska. The bus ride from Phoenix took 3 days. When I finally saw the store, it looked exactly like the photos Tom had sent. 2-story log building with red trim, sitting alone beside the highway with mountains rising behind it. Tom met me at the door with a warm smile and a cup of coffee. "Welcome to your new home, Maria." The apartment was small but clean, a bedroom, tiny kitchen, and living room with windows facing the highway. Tom had stocked the refrigerator with groceries and left fresh flowers on the kitchen table. "I know it's not much," he said, "but I wanted you to feel welcome." The store itself was exactly what you'd expect in rural Alaska. Canned goods, basic clothing, automotive supplies, hunting and fishing gear. We sold gas, propane, and served as the unofficial post office for people who lived up the various side roads. Tom showed me the register system, which was old but simple, and introduced me to our handful of regular customers. "These folks are good people," he said, "but we do get some rough characters passing through. Truckers, seasonal workers, sometimes people running from things. That's why I'm glad to have someone responsible here." On my first day, Tom installed new security cameras around the store and in the back office. "Just a precaution," he explained. "You'll be working alone sometimes, and I want to make sure you're safe." He also gave me a cell phone, a newer model than my beat-up Android. "Service is spotty out here," he said, "but this phone connects directly to my line. If you need anything, day or night, just hit speed dial 1. That first week, Tom was the perfect boss. He was patient while I learned the inventory system, understanding when I made small mistakes, and protective when a drunk trucker got aggressive about the price of beer. Tom appeared from the back room like he'd been watching, and calmly but firmly asked the man to leave. "How did you know I needed help?" I asked after the trucker left. "I was doing paperwork in the office," Tom said, "but I always keep an ear out." Every evening, Tom insisted on walking me upstairs to my apartment. "There are some dangerous people around here," he said. "Locals who don't take kindly to outsiders, especially women on their own. I've had problems before." I appreciated his concern. After 2 years of looking over my shoulder in Phoenix, it felt good to have someone watching out for me. By the second week, I'd settled into a routine. Open at 6, handle the morning coffee rush for locals heading to work, deal with highway traffic during the day, close at 10. Tom usually worked the office during my shifts, handling orders and bookkeeping. But I started noticing things. Tom always seemed to know exactly when I took my breaks, even when I didn't tell him. He'd appear with a sandwich right when I got hungry, or suggest I take 15 minutes right when my feet started hurting. "How do you always know?" I asked one day. "Experience," he said with a smile. 15 years of retail teaches you to read people. He also knew details about my day that I hadn't shared. When I mentioned being tired, he'd say something like, "Well, you were up pretty late last night. I saw your lights on until almost midnight. You can see my apartment from your house? Just looking out for you," he said. "This isn't the city. We take care of each other here." The third week, Tom brought me lunch at exactly 12:30 every day. Always something I liked, always perfectly timed to when I was getting hungry. When I thanked him, he'd say things like, "I noticed you didn't eat much breakfast," or "You seemed to enjoy the soup yesterday." I started paying attention to when he was in the office. The door was usually closed, but I could see the glow from his computer monitor under the crack. He seemed to spend a lot of time at that computer, and I could hear him typing frequently. One afternoon, a customer asked about the new security cameras. "Tom's got this place locked down tight," the man said. "Cameras everywhere, even upstairs." "Upstairs?" I asked. "Yeah, saw him installing them last week. Said he needed to keep an eye on things for insurance purposes." That night, I looked around my apartment more carefully. I found the first camera in the living room, hidden behind a fake plant. Then one in the kitchen, tucked behind the coffee maker. My stomach dropped when I found the third one in my bedroom, concealed in what I'd thought was a decorative mirror. The fourth one was in the bathroom. I felt sick. Tom had been watching me shower, sleep, change clothes, everything. The next morning, I confronted him in the office. "Tom, I found cameras in my apartment." He didn't even look surprised. "Maria, I need to tell you something. Your ex-husband has been calling the store." My blood went cold. "What?" Tom pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten messages. "He's been asking about you, making threats. I didn't want to scare you, but I think he's tracking you down." The messages were detailed and angry, full of the same threats my ex-husband used to make. My hands shook as I read them. "When did these start?" I asked. "About a week after you got here. I've been screening your calls and mail. I didn't want him to find you. But the cameras in my bedroom, my bathroom. I know it seems invasive, but Maria, this man is dangerous. I need to know if he shows up, if anyone approaches the building. The cameras are for your protection." I wanted to believe him. The messages looked real, and they sounded exactly like my ex-husband. And Tom had been nothing but kind to me. "I should call the police," I said. "I already did," they said. "Without him actually showing up, there's nothing they can do." But they agreed the cameras were a good idea. Tom showed me a business card from an Alaska state trooper. Everything seemed legitimate, but something felt wrong. That night, I tried calling my sister in Phoenix from my old phone. No signal. I tried the landline in the store. Dead. The new phone Tom gave me only had his number programmed in it. The next day, I asked Tom about getting internet in my apartment. "The connection up here is terrible," he said. "I've got satellite internet for the business, but it's too expensive for personal use." I asked about driving to town to use the library's internet. "The truck's been acting up," Tom said. "I don't want you getting stranded. Give me a few days to look at it." By the fourth week, I realized I hadn't received any mail since arriving. When I asked Tom about it, he said he'd been holding it for me. "Most of it's junk," he said, handing me a small stack. "I threw the junk mail away to save you the trouble." But there was nothing from my bank, my credit card company, my old job's HR department about my final paycheck. Nothing official at all. "Are you sure this is everything?" I asked. "Maria, I seem paranoid lately. Are you feeling okay?" That's when I realized something else. I'd been feeling foggy and tired, more than I should from just adjusting to a new place. And I'd been hungry all the time, even right after Tom brought me meals. I started paying attention to how I felt before and after eating the food Tom brought me. The pattern was clear. Alert and anxious before, drowsy and confused after. I decided to test it. The next day, I threw away the lunch Tom brought me and ate a granola bar from the store's inventory instead. For the first time in weeks, I felt sharp and clear-headed all afternoon. Tom noticed immediately. "You seem energetic today," he said. "Did you sleep better?" "Yeah, much better." "Good. I was worried about you. You've seemed unstable lately." That word, unstable, hit me like a slap. It was the same word my ex-husband used to use when he wanted to make me doubt myself. That evening, I pretended to eat the dinner Tom brought me. After he left, I searched my apartment more thoroughly. Hidden behind the bedroom dresser, I found a small hole in the wall. Inside was a manila folder stuffed with papers. My hands shook as I opened it. Photographs of me, dozens of them. Some were from the store's security cameras, but others had been taken before I ever came to Alaska. Pictures of me leaving my apartment in Phoenix, getting on the bus, even some that looked like they were taken through my old apartment window. There were printouts of my social media profiles, my divorce records, my employment history, bank statements I'd never seen before, medical records from a hospital I'd never been to, describing psychiatric episodes I'd never had. At the bottom of the folder was a driver's license with my photo but a different name, Maria Hendricks instead of Maria Santos, and a death certificate for Maria Santos, dated 2 weeks ago. According to the papers in this folder, I'd committed suicide in Phoenix shortly after my divorce. Maria Hendricks was a mental patient with a history of delusions and violent behavior. Tom had created an entirely new identity for me. Legally, Maria Santos was dead. I heard footsteps on the stairs outside my apartment. Quickly, I shoved the folder back into the wall and arranged the furniture to hide the hole. When Tom knocked, I opened the door, acting drowsy and confused. "Just checking on you," he said. "You've been so quiet tonight." "Just tired," I mumbled. "Good. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day. We're getting a new shipment." After he left, I lay in bed planning my escape. But every option seemed blocked. My old phone didn't work. The landline was dead. Tom controlled the only vehicle. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and according to the fake medical records, I was a dangerous mental patient. Even if I could get help, who would believe me over Tom? He had 15 years of reputation in the community. I had a folder full of evidence that I was legally dead and clinically insane. The next morning, I refused the breakfast Tom brought me. Within an hour, he was back at my apartment. "Maria, you need to eat. You're getting sick again." "Again?" "The episodes. Like you had in Phoenix before you hurt yourself." He was looking at me with this expression of concerned authority, like a doctor dealing with a difficult patient. "I never hurt myself, Tom." "Maria, you have scars on your wrists. I've seen them." I looked down at my arms. There were scars there, thin, white lines I'd never noticed before. They looked old, healed. I don't remember. That's the illness talking. "Come on, let me make you something to eat." For a moment, I almost believed him. The scars were real. The medical records looked official. Maybe I was sick. Maybe I had tried to kill myself and blocked it out. But then I remembered the photographs taken before I came to Alaska. Tom had been planning this for months. "I'm not hungry," I said. Tom's concerned expression shifted slightly. For just a second, I saw something cold behind his eyes. "Maria, you need to take care of yourself. I won't let you hurt yourself again." "What if I want to leave?" "Leave?" "Maria, you can't leave. You're not well enough to be on your own." "What if I insist?" Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile I'd gotten used to. "Well, then I'd have to call the state hospital. Let them know you're having another episode." That night, I found the basement. I'd assumed the door behind the store counter led to a storage room, but when I finally picked the lock, I found stairs leading down. The basement was finished, carpeted, with a bed, a small refrigerator, and a bathroom. There were chains bolted to the wall. On the bed was another folder. This one contained information about other women. Sarah Mitchell, 26, divorced, worked at the store for 6 months before dying in a car accident. Jessica Turner, 31, recently widowed, worked at the store for 8 months before committing suicide. There were photos of both women taken in the same apartment where I was living. The same concerned, protective expressions from Tom. The same gradual isolation and control. And at the bottom, a driver's license for Sarah Mitchell and a death certificate for Jessica Turner. Tom had been doing this for years. Finding vulnerable women, isolating them, creating false identities and medical histories, then making them disappear when they became too difficult to control. I heard the store's front door chime upstairs. Tom's voice, "Maria, where are you?" I quickly relocked the basement door and went back to my apartment. Tom was waiting at my door with dinner. "You look pale," he said. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired." "You need to eat. And I think it's time we talked about getting you some proper help." "What kind of help?" "There's a facility in Fairbanks. They specialize in cases like yours." I realized Tom was done with me. Whatever timeline he worked on, I'd reached the end of it. That night, I waited until I was sure Tom was asleep, then quietly opened my bedroom window. It was a 12-foot drop to the ground, but I'd rather break a leg than disappear into Tom's basement. I landed hard, twisting my ankle, but I could still walk. The highway stretched empty in both directions. I chose east, toward the direction more traffic seemed to come from. I walked for 3 hours before I saw headlights. A semi-truck with Canadian plates. I stood in the middle of the road, waving my arms. The driver was a woman in her 50s, named Carol. When she got a good look at me, limping, wearing pajamas in 40-degree weather, she immediately knew something was wrong. "Please," I said, "I need you to call the police." "Honey, what happened?" I tried to explain, but it sounded insane even to me. A store owner who'd created fake identities, drugged my food, planned to imprison me in his basement. Carol listened though, and she didn't dismiss me as crazy. "There's a truck stop about 50 miles up," she said. "They've got phones, and a trooper usually stops there for coffee." When we got to the truck stop, Carol called 911 while I sat in her cab, shaking. The state trooper who responded was skeptical at first, until he ran Tom's name and found that 3 women had died while working at his store over the past 10 years. The investigation took months. Police found the hidden cameras, the forged documents, the basement prison. They found evidence that Tom had been intercepting mail and phone calls for years. Most importantly, they found that Sarah Mitchell and Jessica Turner hadn't died the way their death certificates claimed. Tom had killed them when they'd tried to leave, then used his connections in the small community to cover it up. As the only local business owner and a respected member of the community, no one had questioned his version of events. He'd specifically targeted recently divorced women, women fleeing abusive relationships, women with no local connections who wouldn't be missed right away. He'd researched them online, sometimes for months, before making contact with a job offer. Tom was sentenced to life in prison for 2 murders and multiple charges of kidnapping, stalking, and fraud. During the trial, 2 other women came forward with similar stories from other states where Tom had lived. I spent 6 months in therapy, learning to trust my own perceptions again after weeks of gaslighting and drug-induced confusion. The scariest part wasn't the physical danger. It was how close Tom had come to making me believe his version of reality. Now I work as an advocate for domestic violence survivors, helping women recognize the signs of predatory behavior. I've learned that abusers often target women who are already fleeing abuse, knowing they're isolated and desperate. Tom's store sits empty now, a for sale sign gathering dust in the window. Sometimes I drive by when I'm visiting Alaska for work. The building looks smaller than I remember, less threatening, but I never stop. I still get mail sometimes, letters from women who've heard my story and recognize similar patterns in their own lives. That's why I'm telling this story. Because predators like Tom count on isolation, on no one believing the victim, on communities that trust reputation over evidence. If you're in a situation where someone claims to be protecting you but you feel trapped, trust that feeling. If someone is isolating you from friends, family, or communication with the outside world, that's not protection. That's control. And if someone is making you question your own memories and perceptions, remember, you know your own life better than anyone else ever could. My name is Ryan Caldwell, and I've been fixing engines since I was 14. Started in my dad's garage in Youngstown, Ohio. He died when I was 16, left me nothing but debt and an old toolbox. Worked my way through community college, got my ASE certifications, been chasing an automotive engineering degree for 6 years now. I'm not smart like the other kids. Dyslexia makes reading hard, and I learn better with my hands than books. But I needed field experience with Arctic equipment to graduate, and the student loans were crushing me. That's what brought me to Bettles, Alaska in March 2019. Population 47. End of the world. What I found there. Jesus, I still can't sleep some nights. Because what happened wasn't just about one evil man. It was about how a whole town can become something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. The Craigslist ad was weird from the start. Posted at 3:33 a.m. Alaska time. No company name. Just experienced mechanic needed, Bettles AK. Housing provided, must be discreet. The phone number had a 907 area code, but when I called, it rang with that hollow sound you get on international calls. Chuck Morrison answered on the 13th ring, his voice. I counted, "You the Ohio boy?" His voice sounded thick, like he was talking through honey. Good. We need fresh blood up here. Fresh blood. Weird way to put it. Chuck met me at the Fairbanks airport, 50 years old but looked 70. Gray skin, bloodshot eyes, and this smell, sweet and chemical, like antifreeze mixed with something rotting. His handshake lingered too long, fingers unnaturally cold. "Welcome to God's country," he said, loading my bags into a beat-up Ford. "Hope you're ready for the real Alaska." The drive to Bettles took 4 hours through wilderness that felt wrong. Trees grew in perfect spirals. Snow fell upward in some places. My phone's GPS kept showing impossible locations, coordinates that put us in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, then in downtown Anchorage, then somewhere that didn't exist on any map. "Electronics go funny up here," Chuck said when I mentioned it. "Magnetic fields, solar activity. You'll get used to it." But his own GPS worked fine, never glitched once. Bettles looked like every other dying Alaskan town, weathered buildings, rusted equipment, that sense of people hanging on by their fingernails. But something felt off immediately. No dogs barking. No kids playing. Windows had an odd tint, like they were made of colored glass, and everyone moved slowly, like they were underwater. Chuck's garage sat upstream from town, a metal building that hummed constantly, not machinery sounds, but something deeper. Subsonic. Made my teeth ache. "Been fixing machines here 25 years, Chuck said, showing me around. "Snowmobiles, ATVs, generators, folks depend on me. Can't survive up here without good equipment." The workshop looked normal. Air compressors, lifts, diagnostic, computers. But the tools were wrong. Wrenches with extra joints that shouldn't exist. Screwdrivers with handles that felt warm to the touch. And the smell? That sweet chemical odor was everywhere, seeping from the walls. My first customer was Sarah Kowalski. 23, born in Bettles, pretty girl, but her eyes, they reflected light wrong. Like cat eyes, but silver instead of gold. "Welcome to our little town," she said, handing me keys to a Polaris ATV. Her voice had that same thick quality as Chuck's. "Hope you like it here. People who fit in, they stay forever." Her hands shook constantly, fine tremors that never stopped. When I asked if she was cold, she smiled with too many teeth. "Always been like this. Gets stronger every year." The ATV had electrical problems, but when I hooked up the diagnostic computer, it showed readings that made no sense. Voltage levels that should have fried every component. Amperage that violated basic physics. The battery tested as simultaneously dead and overcharged. "Equipment up here runs different," Chuck explained. "Cold does things to electricity. You'll learn." But it wasn't cold. It was March, and the temperature had been hovering around 40 degrees for weeks. My second week, I met more locals. Every single one had the shaking hands, the silver reflecting eyes, that thick, honey voice. They moved like their bones were too heavy, spoke like their tongues were swollen, and they all said the same thing: "Hope you like it here." I started paying attention to details. The way shadows fell wrong, too sharp in some places, too soft in others. How metal tools would be warm to the touch even in the morning cold. The way my reflection looked, different in the garage mirrors. Older, sicker. During my third week, I found the barrels. Behind the garage, dozens of 55-gallon drums leaked rainbow chemicals into soil that shouldn't exist. The ground was wrong, not just contaminated, but fundamentally different. It moved slightly, like it was breathing. The chemical stains formed patterns that hurt to look at directly. Geometric shapes that seemed to have too many angles. "Chuck," I said, walking back inside. "Those drums outside. Been there forever." He cut me off. "Part of the landscape now. Nothing to worry about." But when I looked out the window an hour later, the drums had moved. Not rolled or tipped. Moved. Arranged in a perfect circle around something dark in the center. That night, I called my girlfriend Emma back in Ohio. The call connected, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. "Ryan," it said in Emma's voice, "why did you leave me?" "Emma, you sound different." "I'm dead, Ryan. Died in a car crash 2 days ago. Why weren't you here to save me?" I hung up and called again. Same voice, same message. Emma was dead, and somehow this place knew it before I did. I tried calling my mom, my brother, my college roommate, every number connected to someone claiming to be dead, asking why I'd abandoned them. The voices were perfect. To inflection, speech patterns, inside jokes, but they were all wrong. The next morning, Chuck was grinning. "Phone troubles?" he asked. "Yeah, communications get weird up here, especially for people who don't belong yet." I demanded to use his landline to call Ohio State University, verify that Emma was alive. The call went through, but the registrar who answered said there was no record of Emma Valdez ever being enrolled. No record of Ryan Caldwell either. "According to our system," the voice said, "you never existed." I ran outside and threw up in the snow. When I looked back at the garage, Chuck was watching me through the window. He waved with a hand that had too many fingers. By my 4th week, I understood the truth about Bettles. It wasn't contamination, it was transformation. The chemicals Chuck had been dumping weren't just toxic waste, they were something else. Something that changed things on a molecular level. The townspeople weren't dying from poisoning. They were becoming something new. Something that could survive in an environment that normal humans couldn't. The shaking hands, the silver eyes, the thick voices, they were adaptations. Evolution accelerated and guided by substances that shouldn't exist on Earth. I found Chuck's real records hidden in a floor safe. Not medical files, something else. Charts, tracking, conversion rates, and adaptation timelines. Photos of previous employees at different stages of transformation. Tom Pearson hadn't died of leukemia. The skin says his final photo showed something with Tom's face but silver skin and joints that bent wrong. Mike Stevens wasn't crushed by equipment. He'd grown too large and strange for human machinery. David Chen's final entry read, "Subject achieved full conversion, no longer requires human food or water, recommended for Phase 2 integration." Phase 2 was the basement files showed decades of planning. Chuck hadn't been randomly dumping chemicals. He was following specific formulas provided by something called the Northern Collective. Instructions for gradually converting an isolated population into something that could survive the coming climate change. Something that could live in a world too toxic for normal humans. Bettles was a prototype, a testing ground, and I was the next test subject. My symptoms started during week 5. Not poisoning, conversion. My hands began shaking with the same frequency as the locals. My vision sharpened, started picking up new colors that didn't have names. Food tasted wrong, but the chemical smell from the garage smelled appetizing. Chuck watched my progress with scientific interest. "You're adapting faster than most," he said. "Probably the dyslexia. Brains already wired different, makes the transition easier." He showed me the town's real history. Photos from 1994, when Bettles looked normal. Then, year by year, as the population changed. Normal humans gradually replaced by things that looked human but weren't. The last baseline human had converted or been eliminated in 2011. "We tried volunteers at first," Chuck explained. "Environmental activists, survivalists, people who wanted to be part of something bigger, but they couldn't handle the full truth. Too much psychological resistance. So you switch to unwilling subjects. Young people adapt better. Less fixed mental patterns. And mechanics. You already think in terms of rebuilding broken systems." I was becoming something else. My reflection showed silver creeping into my irises. My bones felt denser, stronger. I could hear electromagnetic fields, smell chemical compositions, see thermal patterns. The human part of me was horrified. But the converted part, it felt like coming home. During week 6, I made contact with the Northern Collective. They spoke to me through the garage's electrical system. Voices in the fluorescent lights, messages scrolling across diagnostic screens. Not aliens, something older. They'd been guiding human evolution for millennia, preparing selected populations for environmental changes that would make Earth uninhabitable for baseline humans. Climate change was just the beginning. Solar radiation increases, atmospheric composition shifts. Magnetic field fluctuations, AC, they knew what was coming. They were trying to save us by changing us. Your species faces extinction. The lights flickered in Morse code. We offer adaptation, survival, evolution. The conversion process was irreversible after 8 weeks. I had 2 weeks to decide, become something new or die fighting it. I chose a third option. Week 7, I contacted federal authorities, but not the EPA. They wouldn't understand. I reached out to a classified government program that investigates anomalous biological events. Deep Black, projects that most FBI agents don't know exist. They listened, they believed, and they were terrified. We've been tracking similar sites across Alaska, northern Canada, and Siberia, Agent Martinez told me over an encrypted satellite phone. This isn't the first, but it might be the most advanced. They couldn't come in with hazmat suits and arrests. The converted population was no longer legally human. They had rights, territorial claims, and abilities that made them extremely dangerous when threatened. Instead, they offered me a choice: complete the conversion and become their inside observer, or extract with partial genetic changes that might kill me. I chose observation. Week 8, I stopped fighting the changes. Let the conversion accelerate. My skin took on a subtle silver sheen. My vision expanded into new spectrums. I could taste electromagnetic fields, hear radio waves, feel the planet's magnetic field lines, but I kept my human consciousness intact, hidden, buried deep enough that the collective couldn't detect it. The full conversion finished during week 9. I was no longer human, but I was still me. The government's psychological conditioning held. I became their first successful infiltrator in a converted population. What I learned over the following months changed everything we thought we knew about the future of our species. The Northern Collective wasn't invading, they were trying to save us. Climate data they shared showed environmental collapse beginning in 2031. Global temperature increases, atmospheric toxicity, solar radiation levels that would make surface life impossible for baseline humans. They'd been converting isolated populations for 40 years, creating survival colonies for the genetic patterns that made humans unique. Art, music, literature, scientific curiosity. They wanted to preserve human culture in forms that could survive the coming catastrophe. Bettles was one of 47 sites worldwide, each preserving different aspects of human civilization in genetically modified populations that could survive environmental conditions that would kill everyone else. The federal government faced an impossible choice: reveal the truth and cause global panic, or allow the conversions to continue and hope enough sites survive to preserve humanity in some form. They chose concealment. Official policy became quiet cooperation. The converted populations would be protected, monitored, and supplied as needed. In exchange, they would preserve human knowledge and culture for eventual reintegration after environmental conditions stabilized. I remain in Bettles as a liaison, part human, part something else, helping manage the transition as more volunteers arrive for conversion. We tell them it's job training. By the time they understand the truth, the choice is adapt or die. The program is expanding. Remote communities across Alaska, northern Canada, Siberia, and Scandinavia. Young people recruited for environmental jobs that gradually transform them into something that can survive the world we're creating. My parents think I'm dead. Official records show I died in an equipment accident. Emma received a death certificate and a small life insurance payout. Ryan Caldwell no longer exists in any government database. But I'm not dead. I'm something new. Something that can breathe methane, metabolize heavy metals, and survive in conditions that would instantly kill the person I used to be. And every month, we get new recruits. Young mechanics, biologists, engineers, people with skills the new world will need. They come for jobs that don't exist and become something that shouldn't exist. The conversion process has been refined. New arrivals adapt faster, with less psychological trauma. Most never realize what's happening until it's complete. They think they're just getting used to the harsh environment. By 2031, when the indulative environmental collapse begins, there will be thousands of converted populations worldwide, hidden cities of modified humans who can survive in a world too toxic for their unmodified relatives. The government calls it humanitarian genetic preservation. I call it the end of the human race as we knew it, but we're still human, just different, better adapted, evolved, and when the baseline population dies from the environmental catastrophe they created, we'll be here to remember what they were, to preserve their art, their music, their stories, To carry forward the best parts of humanity in forms that can survive what's coming. Sometimes I wonder if we could have saved everyone. If there was another way, but the climate data is clear. Baseline humans have maybe 12 years before surface conditions become lethal. We're not the end of humanity, we're its next chapter. And in the long dark winters of the New World, when the sky is too poisoned for normal humans to breathe, our children will look up at stars their parents never could have seen and remember the species that gave them life. That's the real horror story of Bettles, Alaska. Not that we became monsters, that we became the future. My name is Marcus Chen, and I worked at the Naknek salmon processing plant during the summer of 2023. I'm telling this story because 3 months ago, the entire town of Naknek, Alaska, all 487 residents, vanished without a trace. The official investigation is ongoing, but they're looking in all the wrong places. I know what really happened, and I know why they'll never find the bodies. I'd been processing fish for 3 years when my student loans finally broke me. $83,000 in debt, interest climbing, collection calls every morning. That's when I heard about the Alaska money. Naknek salmon paid triple overtime for night shifts, plus isolation pay. Guys were making 40 grand in 3 months, enough to clear my debt and start over. Naknek isn't really a town in summer. It's a money machine disguised as a fishing village. The permanent population swells from 500 to over 7,000 workers who live in company barracks, spend 18 hours a day covered in fish, blood, and wire their paychecks home to real lives in real places. Nobody talks much. Nobody asks questions. You work, you sleep, you work again. The processing plant squats on the bay like a concrete cancer, running 24/7 during salmon season. Day shift handles the bulk. 50,000 fish processed, cleaned, and shipped. Night shift was supposed to be quality control, just 6 of us examining damaged or unusual specimens for research clients. My supervisor, Jake Morrison, had been there 15 years. Thick hands permanently stained red-black, eyes like winter ice, the kind of guy who'd seen things that aged him wrong. Special processing, he told me first night, pointing to a separate conveyor. Any fish that's damaged or unusual goes there. We got buyers who pay premium for specific characteristics. The work was simple enough. Stand in a room kept at 35 degrees, examine salmon under fluorescent lights, sort the normal from the abnormal. Most fish were perfect, but every hour, something would come through that made my skin crawl. First week, I found salmon with bite marks that defied explanation. Circular wounds, 4 inches across, with too many puncture marks arranged in perfect spirals. Like something with rotating jaws had taken methodical bites. I'd processed thousands of fish, IDA'd. This wasn't seal damage or orca predation. This was something else entirely. Jake, what makes marks like this? He glanced at the fish, and his whole body went rigid. For just a second, I saw something in his eyes that looked like recognition. Fear. Guilt. Unusual seal bite, he said quickly. Arctic seals got different jaw structures. Mark it for special processing. But that night, I found him in the parking lot at 3 a.m., talking quietly on his phone. I caught fragments, specimens arriving on schedule, feeding requirements increasing, population growth exceeding projections. Week 2 brought something that made me question my sanity. A salmon with handprints pressed into its flesh. Not human prints. These had webbed fingers stretching 8 inches from palm to tip, with what looked like suction cups along each digit. The pressure had been enormous, crushing the fish's internal organs and leaving perfect impressions in the meat. I showed it to Tommy, a second-year worker. His face went white as printer paper. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "They said this wouldn't happen until September." They said what wouldn't happen? Tommy's eyes snapped to mine, suddenly empty. "Nothing," I meant. "I never seen anything like that. Must be some kind of equipment damage." The other night workers, Sarah, Mike, Danny, and Lisa, all gave identical responses when I asked about unusual damage. Word for word identical, like they'd been coached. But I noticed things. Sarah kept checking her phone obsessively, scrolling through what looked like news articles. Mike had started carrying a hunting knife on his belt. Danny was losing weight fast, barely eating, jumping at every sound. They were scared. All of them. Scared and lying. Week 3, I discovered where the damaged fish really went. Not to university researchers, 2 unmarked refrigerated trucks that arrived between 2 and 4 a.m. No license plates, windows tinted black, drivers who never spoke. Jake personally supervised these transfers, loading specific specimens into foam-lined containers marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Research specimens for marine biology programs, he explained when I asked. But his voice cracked slightly on the word research. The plant had a restricted freezer I'd never been allowed to enter. During week 4, Jake stepped out for his usual 2 a.m. smoke break. I used his keycard, left carelessly on his desk, and slipped inside. The smell hit me first. Not the clean scent of frozen fish, but something organic and wrong. Like low tide mixed with copper pennies and rotting kelp. Dozens of salmon hung from hooks, but these weren't normal fish. 6 to 8 feet long, easily 200 pounds each. Their heads were grotesquely enlarged, with human-like molars jutting from elongated jaws. Some had additional limbs sprouting from their sides, not fins, but jointed appendages ending in what looked disturbingly like human hands. But the worst were the ones that had been partially dissected. I could see internal structures that made no biological sense. Organs arranged in patterns, chambers filled with dark fluid, neural networks that looked almost like primitive brain tissue. I grabbed my phone to document this, but the camera malfunctioned. Every photo came out as solid black, even though the lighting was fine. The video function wouldn't start. Even the flashlight kept cutting out. Find what you were looking for? Jake stood in the doorway, his keycard dangling from his finger. His expression wasn't angry, it was resigned. I was looking for the bathroom, I managed. Bathroom's been in the same place for 15 years, Marcus. You've used it 50 times. That night, Jake told me everything. Started in 2016, he said, locking his office door behind us. Local fishing boat found something in their nets. Young specimen, maybe 3 feet long. Humanoid, but with gills, webbed extremities, intelligence in its eyes. Instead of throwing it back, they brought it here. He opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder marked Project Deepwater Heritage. Marine biologists couldn't classify it. Genetic testing showed human DNA mixed with something ancient, Precambrian markers that shouldn't exist in anything alive today. But it was intelligent, it learned, and it grew. What is it? We think it's what's left of them, Jake said quietly. The original inhabitants, before the ice ages, before humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge. They were here first, Marcus. In the deep waters, around Alaska, and they never really left. Jake showed me photographs spanning 7 years. The creature growing from 3 feet to 6 feet to its current 8-foot length. Its intelligence developing, learning to manipulate simple tools, understanding human speech, demonstrating problem-solving abilities that rivaled primates. The company realized what they had, a living link to pre-human evolution, worth billions in medical research, genetic engineering, pharmaceutical applications. So they started feeding it, keeping it healthy, studying it. What do you feed something like that? Jake's face went gray. Salmon, mostly. About 100 pounds a day. But as it grew larger, its dietary needs too evolved. It started preferring live prey, and eventually it developed a taste for something specific. What? Human fear, Jake said. It doesn't just eat meat, Marcus. It feeds on terror. The more afraid the prey, the more nutritious the meal. That's why the damaged fish always show stress markers, elevated cortisol, adrenaline saturation. The creature hunts for maximum psychological impact. I felt sick. The workers who quit suddenly didn't quit. The creature's grown too large for the holding tanks, too intelligent for containment. When workers get suspicious, start asking questions, threaten the project, they become supplemental nutrition. Why are you telling me this? Jake pulled out another file with my name on it. Because you were specifically recruited, Marcus. Young, isolated, heavy debt, no family in Alaska. Your student loan situation made you desperate enough to take a job in the middle of nowhere. If you disappear, It'll look like you ran from your creditors. You're going to feed me to that thing? Not me, them. Jake pointed toward the ceiling. Corporate knows about every worker, every shift, every conversation. They've been monitoring you since day one. Your questions about the damaged fish, your curiosity about the restricted areas, it's all been reported. That's when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. Through the office window, I could see the main processing floor in chaos. The holding tanks had been opened. Something large was moving through the facility. Jake grabbed a radio but got only static. The phones were dead. Emergency exits had been locked from the outside. Feeding time, Jake whispered. They always do it during power outages. Gives the creature darkness to hunt, makes it look like an accident when they find the bodies. Through the security monitors, I watched my coworkers die. The creature was massive now, 8 feet tall, moving with terrifying grace. Its skin had changed from pale gray to deep black, allowing it to blend with shadows. But the worst part was its intelligence. It wasn't hunting randomly, it was playing with its prey. Sarah tried to hide in the packaging area. The creature, he found her immediately. But instead of killing her quickly, it began stalking her, circling, making noise to increase her fear. I could see her terror spiking on the thermal cameras, ADS, body temperature rising, heart rate accelerating. The creature was farming her fear, maximizing the adrenaline content before feeding. When it finally struck, Sarah's scream cut off abruptly. The creature fed methodically, starting with the organ's richest in stress hormones. Danny tried to reach the emergency exit. The creature let him get within 10 feet before revealing that the doors had been welded shut from outside. Danny's despair was visible even on the grainy security feed. The creature approached slowly, savoring his hopelessness. It can sense terror, Jake explained. Elevated heart rate, stress pheromones, electrical activity in the brain. Fear makes the meat more nutritious, like marinating. The longer the terror, the better the meal. I forced myself to stay calm, controlling my gain, breathing, slowing my heart rate. On the monitors, I watched the creature pause mid-hunt, tilting its head like it was listening. Then, it turned toward the office. It knows you're here, Jake said, but it can't sense fear in you right now. That confuses it. The creature appeared outside the office window. Up close, I could see details that made my stomach churn. Its eyes weren't just pale, they were compound, like an insect's, tracking multiple targets simultaneously. Its mouth opened to reveal 3 rows of teeth, but arranged in distinctly human patterns, and its hands, they were human hands, but scaled and webbed, with surgical precision in their movements. It pressed one palm against the reinforced glass, leaving a perfect handprint, the same handprint I'd been finding on damaged salmon. It's been marking its territory, Jake whispered. Every fish that comes through here, it's been testing, looking for the ones with the right fear response, building a profile of ideal prey. The creature moved away from the window, and I heard metal groaning. It was testing the structural integrity of the building, looking for weak points. Jake, there has to be a way out. There is, he said, pulling out a pistol. But you're not going to like it. What do you mean? The creature doesn't just hunt for food anymore. It's preparing for reproduction. It needs human genetic material to create hybrid offspring. The company wants to breed an entire population of these things. Jake's hands were shaking. I've been helping them for 7 years, feeding people to that thing, covering up disappearances, all for research bonuses and corporate promotions. The office door began to buckle. The creature was using tools now. I could hear metal prying against metal. It's learning, Jake continued. Every hunt makes it smarter. It's studied human behavior, human fears, human weaknesses, and now it's ready to reproduce. How do we stop it? We don't, but we can prevent the breeding program. Jake held up a small device that looked like a detonator. Explosive charges in the basement, wired to the building's foundation. If I trigger this, the whole plant goes into the bay. What about the other creatures? Jake stared at me. Other creatures? There are more, aren't there? This can't be the only one. Jake's silence was answer enough. The door burst open. The creature filled the doorway, 8 feet of predatory intelligence. But instead of attacking immediately, it spoke. Jake, it said in a voice like grinding shells, Time for feeding. Its English was perfect, but the accent was unlike anything human, ancient, pre-linguistic. The young one grows hungry, it continued. Bring the new meat. Young one, there were offspring. Jake raised the detonator. I'm sorry, Marcus. For all of it. Jake, wait. The explosion threw me against the wall. Water rushed in as the building's foundation collapsed, sending everything into Bristol Bay. I grabbed a piece of floating debris and held on as the current carried me away from the destruction. Coast Guard helicopters found me 6 hours later, hypothermic but alive. I told them everything. The creatures, the breeding program, the corporate conspiracy. They classified the incident as structural failure due to foundation erosion. But that wasn't the end. Within weeks, fishing boats throughout Bristol Bay reported attacks by something with human intelligence and predatory instincts. Fish populations collapsed. 3 commercial vessels disappeared entirely. Then the disappearances spread inland. Hikers along the Naknek River, campers near Lake Iliamna, native villages reporting people vanishing near water sources. The creatures weren't just surviving, they were adapting, learning, spreading. 6 months later, I got a call from a CDC researcher. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation despite the name. Mr. Chen, we need to talk. Recent genetic analysis of tissue samples from Bristol Bay shows something disturbing. The creatures you described aren't just hybrids. They're something much older. What do you mean? DNA analysis suggests they're the original inhabitants of Alaska. Millions of years of evolution, adapted for deep water survival. They were here before the ice ages, before continental drift, before anything we'd recognize as human. That's impossible. Climate change is melting permafrost that's been frozen for millennia. We're finding preserved specimens in ice cores, genetic material in ancient lake beds. These creatures have been dormant, waiting. The warming waters of Bristol Bay woke them up. How many are there? Unknown. But satellite imagery shows organized movement patterns in water systems throughout Alaska. They're not just surviving, they're coordinating, building communities, and the disappearances are accelerating. 3 weeks after that call, Dr. Chen disappeared. Her research was classified, her lab sealed. Official cause, equipment accident. But I know better. Last month, the entire town of Naknek vanished. All 487 permanent residents, gone without a trace. No signs of struggle, no bodies found. The official investigation is focusing on mass evacuation due to industrial accident. They're looking in all the wrong places. I know what happened because I've been tracking the disappearances. They're following water sources, rivers, lakes, coastal areas. The creatures are taking entire communities now, systematically eliminating human presence near their habitat, and they're getting smarter. Security footage from Naknek shows the residents walking calmly toward the water at 3 a.m., all on the same night. No panic, no resistance. Like they were being called. The creatures have learned to mimic human voices. They can reproduce the speech patterns of loved ones, calling people to the water's edge. But the time you realize the voice isn't quite right, it's too late. I'm telling this story because I'm probably next. I've been getting calls from my sister, asking me to come visit her in Anchorage. But my sister died in a car accident 2 years ago. The voice on the phone is perfect, exact pitch, familiar speech patterns, shared memories that only she would know. But there's something underneath the words, something cold and patient and hungry. They're learning everything about us, our relationships, our weaknesses, our fears. And they're using that knowledge to hunt us systematically. If you live in Alaska, stay away from the water after dark. Don't trust familiar voices calling from unexpected places. And if you find fish with circular bite marks or webbed handprints, don't report it to authorities. Because the authorities might not be human anymore. The creatures aren't just feeding now, they're replacing us. One community at a time, one voice at a time, until there's nothing left of human Alaska except empty towns and memories echoing across dark water. And the worst part? I think they've been planning this for a very long time. My phone is ringing again. It's my sister's voice, sweet and familiar, asking why I haven't called her back. But this time, I can hear water lapping in the background. They're getting closer. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been delivering mail for the United States Postal Service for 8 years. I started with suburban routes in Anchorage, nice sidewalks, friendly dogs, mailboxes right by the road. I thought I understood what a tough route meant until I took the job nobody else would touch. The Northwestern Alaska mail circuit that included the villages around Nome. You probably heard about Nome if you watched that Alien movie a few years back. What you didn't hear was the real story. The story the FBI buried. The story that made 6 mail carriers quit and 3 others disappear completely between 2019 and 2024. I needed the money. The job paid triple hazard pay, which should have been my first red flag. My supervisor, Mike Torres, was honest about the statistics. 24 people vanished from these villages between 1,960 and 2004, he told me. The FBI investigated and said it was alcohol and weather. But the disappearances haven't stopped, Sarah. They've gotten worse. He slid a folder across his desk. Inside were photos of missing persons from the last 5 years. Native faces, white faces, young and old, all last seen in the cluster of villages along my new route. The previous mail carrier, Janet Mueller, lasted 3 weeks. Found her truck abandoned on the tundra, engine still running, mail scattered everywhere, no footprints leading away, like she just evaporated. The route covered 8 villages, connected by 200 miles of unpaved roads that barely deserved the name. Each settlement had between 15 and 60 residents, Inupiat families who had lived on this land for thousands of years before white settlers arrived and built Nome as a gold rush town. The people were hardy, practical, and according to the tribal elders, deeply afraid of something they wouldn't name. My first week went fine. The landscape was beautiful in its harshness, endless white tundra, broken by scattered buildings that looked like toy houses, dropped from the sky. The villages felt timeless, with traditional subsistence hunters working alongside modern satellite internet. People were polite but reserved, especially with outsiders. But I noticed something odd. Every village had the same warning painted on buildings, carved into fence posts, written on paper, signs taped to windows. The words were in Inuktitut, the local language. When I asked what they meant, people would glance away and change the subject. It wasn't until my second week that someone finally translated them for me. They say, "Don't follow the crying children," explained Maria Kanguk, an elder in Shishmaref. She was one of the few villagers who would make eye contact when she spoke to me. And, "Fire at night, copper in pocket, dog at side." "What does that mean?" I asked. Maria's expression darkened. "It means stay alive, postal lady. It means the Kushtaka are hunting again." I'd never heard the word before. When I pressed her for Bonde details, Maria glanced around nervously, then leaned close. "Ottermen, shapeshifters. They take the form of crying children, lost family members, anyone who might make you want to help. Once you follow them, away from safety." She made a throat-cutting gesture. "Some they kill, others they take to the water and change into more Kushtaka. Souls trapped forever, never able to find peace." I thought it was just folklore, the kind of supernatural stories isolated communities tell to explain random tragedies. Native cultures have always been rich with spiritual beliefs about the natural world. Then I started hearing the children crying. It began during my 3rd week, on the stretch of road between Brevig Mission and Teller. I was driving through a particularly desolate section when I heard it, a child's voice calling for help. High and desperate, the kind of sound that triggers every protective instinct. I stopped the truck and listened. The crying came from somewhere off the road, behind a low hill. It sounded like a young girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sobbing, "Help me, please, help me," over and over. I grabbed my emergency kit and followed the sound. The voice led me about 50 yards from the road, always seeming just over the next ridge. The crying grew more desperate, more heartbreaking. But when I crested the hill where the sound should have been coming from, I found nothing. No child, no footprints in the snow, nothing. The crying stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was complete and unnatural. No wind, no birds, no sound at all. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. My own voice calling back toward the road. "Help me, please help me." I ran back to my truck, heart hammering. When I reached the road, I could still hear my voice in the distance, crying for help, but I was standing right there. Someone, or something, was mimicking me perfectly. I drove away fast and didn't stop until I reached Teller. When I told the postal clerk there what happened, she just nodded grimly. "That's how it starts," she said. "They learn your voice first. Then they start using it." Using it for what? To call other people away from safety, to make more voices for the collection. Over the following weeks, the encounters escalated. I heard my mother's voice calling from empty buildings, my sister's voice crying from frozen streams, my dead grandmother singing lullabies from abandoned cars scattered along the route. But the worst part wasn't the voices, it was the children. I started seeing them everywhere. Small figures standing by the roadside, always just at the edge of my vision. When I looked directly, they appeared to be normal kids in winter clothes. Lost, cold, crying, every instinct screamed at me to stop and help, but I remembered Maria's warning. I kept driving. The figures began following my truck. In my mirrors, I could see them running behind me at impossible speeds, keeping pace even when I drove 50 miles per hour. Their movements were wrong, too fluid, too fast, joints bending in directions human joints shouldn't bend. When I mentioned this to other villagers, the responses were always the same. Nervous glances, warnings to carry copper coins, to keep fire ready, to never travel alone after dark. And always, the same advice: don't look too closely at the children. If you see their real faces, one old hunter told me, you'll understand why they cry. I didn't want to understand. But during my 6th week, I didn't have a choice. I was driving the evening route between Wales and Little Diomede when I saw her, a girl, maybe 8 years old, standing in the middle of the road. She wore a bright red parka and was crying hysterically. I had to stop or run her over. The moment I stopped, every instinct I had screamed danger. But she was just a little girl, obviously lost and terrified. I couldn't drive away. I got out of the truck, keeping my distance. "Hey, sweetie, are you okay? Where are your parents?" She looked up at me, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. Her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, black as deep water. Her mouth was too wide, stretching from ear to ear in a grotesque parody of human proportions. When she spoke, her voice was layered, dozens of different children's voices speaking in unison. "Please help us," they said. "We're so cold, we've been waiting so long." I stumbled backward, but she began moving toward me with that same wrong, flowing motion I'd seen in my mirrors. Her limbs moved like water, joints bending impossibly as she approached. "We need more voices," the collective voices continued. "Your voice is so pretty, we want to add it to our song." I ran for my truck, but she was faster. In seconds, she was standing beside my driver's door, hand pressed against the window, where her palm touched the game. Glass, frost spread in spiraling patterns. Through the crystalline frost, I could see more shapes approaching from the tundra. Dozens of children, all with the same wrong proportions, all moving with that liquid grace. Behind them came larger figures, adults with the same black eyes and too wide mouths. I managed to start the engine and drove straight through the girl in the red parka. She didn't move out of the way, didn't try to dodge. My truck passed through her like she was made of mist, and in my rearview mirror, I watched her dissolve into vapor before reforming, still wearing that impossible smile. The other figures chased me for miles, always staying just behind the truck, their numbers growing as more shapes emerged from the landscape. I didn't stop driving until I reached Nome, and even then, I could see dark figures lingering at the town's edge, watching. I tried to report what I'd seen to the local police. The officer who took my statement didn't seem surprised. "Ma'am, you're the 4th person this month to report similar incidents. The tribal council has asked us to refer these cases to their traditional authorities." Traditional authorities? The elders know how to deal with this. It's not really a police matter. That's when I realized the authorities weren't just aware of the problem, they were actively covering it up. The FBI's investigation into the Nome disappearances had concluded that alcohol and weather were responsible, but they'd never explained why the missing persons reports kept coming in year after year. I requested a meeting with the tribal council. What they told me changed everything I thought I knew about reality. The Kushtaka have been here longer than our oldest stories, explained Thomas Kanguk, Maria's brother and the council's spiritual advisor. They are not evil in the way white people understand evil. They are hungry. Hungry for human warmth, human voices, human connection. They were once human themselves, long ago, but they chose the water and the cold instead of fire and community. He showed me traditional artwork carved from walrus ivory, images of creatures that were part human, part otter, with elongated limbs and faces that shifted between human and animal features. Every generation, they recruit more. Take people who are alone, vulnerable, far from help. They mimic the voices of loved ones to lure their targets away from safety. Once they have you in the water or the deep cold, they change you. Your soul joins their collective, and your voice becomes part of their calling song. How do I protect myself? Fire drives them back. They fear what reminds them of the human warmth they abandoned. Copper burns them. Dogs can sense their true nature and will attack on sight. But the most important protection is knowledge. Know that every crying child in the wilderness is them. Every familiar voice calling from empty places is them. Never follow, never help, never stop. I continued working the route for 2 more months, armed with this knowledge. I carried copper pennies in every pocket, kept a flare gun loaded, and made friends with every sled dog in every village. The encounters continued, but I was prepared. The voices became more sophisticated. They learned to mimic radio chatter, cell phone calls, GPS directions. The figures became more convincing, perfect replicas of people I knew, down to their clothing and mannerisms. But there were always tells: the black eyes, the 2 wide mouths, the way they moved like liquid instead of flesh. The worst encounter came during my final week. I was delivering mail to Gambell when I heard a voice I recognized: Janet Mueller, the mail carrier who had disappeared before me. "Sarah, help me," Janet's voice called from an abandoned fish processing plant. "I'm trapped in here. Please, I've been hiding for months." The voice was perfect, Janet's slight Midwest accent, her nervous laugh, even the way she pronounced my name. For a moment, I almost believed it. Almost ran toward the building to help. Instead, I pulled out my flare gun and fired a shot toward the building. The moment the red light hit the walls, an inhuman shriek erupted from inside. Not Janet's voice, but something that sounded like dozens of voices screaming in harmony. Dark shapes poured out of the building like smoke, flowing across the ground toward my truck. I drove away as fast as the icy road would allow. In my mirrors, I could see them reforming into human shapes, watching me leave with those terrible black eyes. When I turned in my resignation the next week, Mike didn't argue. "You lasted longer than most," he said. "Longer than Janet, anyway. What really happened to her?" Mike was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled out a file I'd never seen before. Janet's truck was found with the engine running and mail scattered around it. But what we didn't report was what the search dogs found. They tracked her scent to the edge of Norton Sound, where it just stopped. Like she walked into the water and disappeared. He showed me photos from the search. Boot prints leading to the water's edge, then nothing. But in the background of one photo, barely visible, were other shapes in the water. Sleek, dark forms that could have been seals or otters, or something else entirely. The dogs wouldn't go near the water, Mike continued. Wouldn't even approach the shoreline. They just whined and backed away, hackles up, like they sensed something wrong. The search team found other things too, clothing that belonged to people who'd gone missing over the years, all piled up in underwater caves, visible at low tide. I left Alaska the next month, took a mail route in Phoenix, where the biggest supernatural threat is the heat. But I still have nightmares about those voices, those black eyes, those impossible smiles. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear them calling. The FBI officially maintains that the gnome disappearances are explained by alcohol and harsh weather. The tribal councils know better. They've erected new warning signs in all the villages, in English now as well as Inuktitut. Report any sightings of unknown children to tribal authorities immediately. Do not approach. Do not attempt to help. Do not follow voices calling from empty places. The mail route still exists. They've upgraded the pay to quadruple hazard compensation, and they require carriers to travel in pairs now, but people still go missing. The Kushtaka are patient, adaptable, and hungry. They're always hungry. And according to the tribal elders, they're spreading, moving inland, following rivers and streams to new hunting grounds, learning new voices, collecting new souls for their endless, crying song. If you ever find yourself in remote Alaska and you hear a child crying for also for so, we help remember this story. Remember that some things that look human aren't human anymore. Remember that the most terrifying monsters are the ones that wear familiar faces and speak with voices you trust. And whatever you do, don't follow the crying children into the dark. Because once the Kushtaka have your voice, they'll use it to call someone else. Someone who trusts you enough to follow. Someone who will become the next voice in their collection. The crying never stops in the villages around Nome. It just gets louder, adding new voices to the chorus, singing the same desperate song, "Help me, please help me." But it's not a cry for rescue, it's a hunting call. And they're always, always hunting. Asterisk. Based on documented disappearances in Nome, Alaska, and traditional Kushtaka legends of the Tlingit and Inupiat peoples, 24 people have officially vanished from the Nome area since 1960, with disappearances continuing to this day. The FBI's 2005 investigation attributed these to environmental factors, but questions remain unanswered. My name is Marcus Riley, and I've been a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service for 12 years. I've delivered mail through blizzards in Montana, ice storms in Minnesota, and heat waves in Arizona. The motto says, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night will stop us," and I've lived by those words. But what happened during my 6 months in Ketchum, Alaska, broke something inside me that will never heal. Some mail routes should never be finished. I took the job in Ketchum in September 2023. It was a temporary assignment, I see. The regular carrier had disappeared in February, and they'd been rotating temps through ever since. The pay was triple normal rate because nobody wanted to stay. I should have asked why. Ketchum sits about 40 miles from Fairbanks, population 847 according to the last census. It's one of those places that exists because of logging and hunting, where families have lived for 3 or 4 generations without much contact with the outside world. My route covered the town itself plus 17 isolated cabins scattered through the surrounding forest. The post office was a converted general store with a wood stove and no cell service. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, was a stern woman in her 60s who'd been running the place for 30 years. She handed me the route map and a .44 revolver on my first day. "Bears," she said. But she wouldn't look me in the eye. The town felt wrong from the beginning. People would watch me from behind curtains but rarely came outside. When they did, they'd grab their mail quickly and hurry back inside, like they were afraid of being seen. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody said hello. The worst part was the smell. Ketchum smelled like rotting meat, but it wasn't constant. It would hit you in waves, sweet, cloying decay that made your stomach turn. I asked Janet about it, and she said it was just the processing plant upwind. But I never saw any processing plant. My first week, I was routine except for the isolation. I'd deliver mail to the Main Street addresses in the morning, then take the postal truck out to the forest cabins in the afternoon. The forest roads were barely wide enough for my vehicle, winding through thick pine trees that blocked out most of the sunlight even at noon. Some of the addresses were strange. I had mail for people at cabins that looked abandoned, broken windows, collapsed roofs, grass growing over the driveways. But the mailboxes were always clean and recently painted. I'd leave the mail anyway. That's what the route sheet said to do. The first disturbing thing happened on my second Tuesday. I was delivering to a cabin about 6 miles out when I heard screaming from inside. It sounded like a child, high-pitched and terrified. I knocked on the door, but nobody answered. The screaming continued for about 3 minutes, then stopped suddenly. I called it in on my radio, but Janet told me to mind my own business. "People handle things differently out here," she said. "Just deliver the mail." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that child's scream in my head. The screaming happened again the next week, at a different cabin. This time, it sounded like an adult woman. Same pattern, 3 minutes of terror, then sudden silence. When I knocked, nobody answered, but I could see movement behind the curtains. I started keeping a log of the incidents. Over the next month, I heard screaming from 12 different addresses. It was always during the day, always when I was delivering mail, and always exactly 3 minutes long. The townspeople acted like they couldn't hear it, even when it was loud enough to hurt your ears. In October, I found the first body. I was delivering mail to the Hendricks place, a rundown cabin with a rusted mailbox, when I saw something pale in the tree line. At first I thought it was a deer, but when I got closer, I realized it was a person. It was hanging from a pine tree about 20 feet from the cabin, suspended by what looked like fishing line. The body was completely naked and had been there long enough that the birds had been at it. But the weird thing was how it was positioned. Arms spread wide, legs straight down, like it was being displayed. I threw up twice before I could get back to my truck and call it in. The state police arrived 6 hours later. They cut down the body and took statements, but they acted like this was routine. Detective Sarah Walsh told me it was probably a suicide, even though there was no way the person could have hung themselves that high up. "Happens more than you'd think out here," she said. "Winter depression hits people hard." But it wasn't winter yet, and nobody commits suicide by hanging themselves 20 feet up in a tree. That night, Janet called me at home. "You didn't see anything today," she said. "Just delivered the mail and came back. Understand?" I didn't understand, but I said yes anyway. I needed the job. The next day, there was new mail for the Hendricks address. I left it in the box like always, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the letters. 2 weeks later, I found the second body. This one was at the Morrison place. No relation to Janet, just coincidence. It was a woman, maybe 30 years old, staked out spread eagle in a small clearing behind the cabin. She'd been there for days, covered in bite marks that looked too big to be from any animal I knew. But she was still alive. Her eyes followed me as I approached. She tried to speak, but her throat had been damaged somehow. All that came out was a wet gurgling sound. There were IV tubes running into her arms, like someone was keeping her hydrated while she slowly died. I called 911 immediately, but by the time the paramedics arrived, she was dead. The IV equipment was gone. The stakes had been pulled up. All that was left was her body and the holes in the croups, ground. Detective Walsh said it was probably a bear attack, even though there were no paw prints and the wounds were clearly made by something with hands. "Bears are smart," she said. "They can use tools when they're hungry enough." I knew she was lying, but I didn't know why. That's when I started paying attention to the mail I was delivering. Most of it was normal: bills, catalogs, personal letters. But some addresses were getting packages that felt wrong. Heavy boxes with no return address, always marked fragile and refrigerated. The boxes were cold to the touch and made sloshing sounds when I moved them. I started noticing patterns. The addresses that got the strange packages were the same ones where I'd heard screaming, and they were all paying for expedited delivery in cash, which is unusual for people living in isolated cabins. I tried opening one of the packages, but it was sealed with some kind of industrial tape that I couldn't cut through with my pocket knife. The label said it was from something called Northland Medical Supply, but when I looked them up, no such company existed. By November, I'd found 6 more bodies, all displayed in impossible ways, all clearly tortured before death, and all officially ruled as accidents or suicides by the state police. The detective would show up, take photos, make some notes, and have the bodies removed within hours. The townspeople never seemed surprised. They'd watch from their windows as the body bags were loaded into the coroner's van, but nobody came outside to ask questions. Nobody seemed upset or scared. It was like they were expecting it. The first snowfall came in late November, and that's when everything got worse. I was delivering mail to the furthest cabin on my route, a place owned by someone named P. Thornfield. When I got stuck in a snowdrift about half a mile from the address, I had to walk the rest of the way, carrying the mail through knee-deep snow. The Thornfield cabin was bigger than the others, with smoke coming from the chimney and light in the windows. For the first time in weeks, it actually looked like someone lived there. I knocked on the door, and a man in his 50s answered. He was tall and thin, with pale skin and black hair that was too long for someone his age. He smiled when he saw me, but his teeth were stained brown. "Marcus," he said, even though I'd never told him my name. "We've been waiting for you." The "we" made my skin crawl, but I handed him his mail anyway. It was a single package, one of the cold ones that made sloshing sounds. "Would you like to come in and warm up?" he asked. "It's a long walk back to your truck." I should have said no. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I was freezing, and my truck was stuck, and I still believed that people were basically good. The inside of the cabin was warm and smelled like cooking meat. There was a fire in the stone fireplace, and old furniture that looked handmade. It seemed normal, except for the basement door, which had about 6 different locks on it. Thornfield offered me coffee, and I accepted. While he was in the kitchen, I looked around the main room. There were hunting trophies on the walls, but they weren't deer or moose. They were human hands, mounted like antlers. I was staring at a child's hand when Thornfield came back with the coffee. "Local craftsmanship," he said casually. "We take pride in our work here." The coffee tasted bitter, with an aftertaste I couldn't identify. I drank it anyway because I was cold and scared and couldn't think straight. "You've been asking questions," Thornfield said, sitting across from me in a chair that looked like it was made from bones. "That's not wise in a place like Ketchum." "I'm just doing my job," I said, but my voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. "Your job is to deliver mail," he said, "not to call the free police every time you find one of our displays." The word "displays" made my stomach turn. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't work properly. "The coffee." He drugged the coffee. "The people here have been practicing the old ways for generations," Thornfield said, opening the package I'd delivered. Inside was a human heart, still fresh, sitting in ice. "We worship through pain, through sacrifice, through art." He pulled the heart out of the box and took a bite from it like it was an apple. Blood ran down his chin as he chewed. "Every winter, we need fresh materials," he said. "Usually we use tourists or hunters, but this year, we have you." I could hear movement from the basement, footsteps, scraping sounds, and what might have been whimpering. How many people were down there? How long had this been going on? "The previous mail carrier lasted 6 months, Thornfield said. "He was very creative, very artistic. We still display some of his work in the town square." I thought about the statue in the center of Ketchum that I'd assumed was some kind of abstract art. It was bronze-colored and twisted into an impossible shape. Now I realized it wasn't bronze. It was a person, treated with chemicals to preserve it. The drug was making it hard to think, but I forced myself to focus. I still had the gun Janet had given me, if I could reach it. Thornfield saw me looking at my belt and laughed. "We removed that while you were admiring our trophies," he said. "You won't be needing it where you're going." I heard the basement door unlock, 6 different clicks as he turned each bolt. The sounds from below got louder. Crying, pleading, and underneath it all, the sound of meat being cut. "The winter solstice is next month," Thornfield said. "We'll have plenty of time to prepare you properly." That's when I did the only thing I could think of. I threw my coffee cup at his face and ran for the front door. The cold air outside hit me like a physical blow, but it also cleared my head a little. I could hear Thornfield shouting behind me and other voices answering from houses around town. The whole place was connected. They were all part of it. I ran through the snow toward my truck, but I could hear vehicles starting up behind me. They were coming after me. My truck was still stuck, but I managed to get it started. I gunned the engine and spun the wheels until something caught, and I lurched forward out of the drift. Snow was flying everywhere, and I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but I kept driving. I made it back to the main road, but I didn't stop in Ketchum. I drove straight through town and kept going until I reached Fairbanks. I called the FBI from a gas station and told them everything. They sent agents to investigate, but when they got to Ketchum, the town was empty. Every house, every cabin, every building was abandoned. It was like 847 people had just vanished overnight. The official report said that Ketchum had been a ghost town for over a decade. According to government records, the post office had been closed since 2010. There was no Janet Morrison in the system, no Detective Sarah Walsh, no P. Thornfield, but I have the route sheets. I have photos on my phone. I have the gun Janet gave me, with the serial number filed off. The FBI agents said I'd had some kind of breakdown. Stress-induced hallucinations. They recommended therapy and disability leave. I took the leave, but I didn't take the therapy. I know what I saw. I know what happened to me. I've been researching Ketchum ever since. According to historical records, there was a town there from 1892 to 1987. The population gradually decreased over the decades until the last residents left during a particularly harsh winter. But there are other records, older ones, that tell a different story. Native tribes in the area have legends about a place where people learned to worship pain, where families passed down rituals that kept them alive through the worst winters, but changed them into something that wasn't quite human anymore. The legends say that every few generations, the town would disappear for a while, then reappear somewhere else in Alaska, always in winter, always hungry. I quit the postal service and moved to Florida. I thought distance would help, but it hasn't, because last week I got a package at my new address. It was cold to the touch and made sloshing sounds when I moved it. The return address said Northland Medical Supply, but when I looked closer, the postmark was from a town called Millfield, Alaska. Population 847. I haven't opened the package. I can smell it through the cardboard, that same sweet, rotting smell that filled Ketchum. And sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear something moving inside. They found me. Somehow, they found me. I'm writing this down because I don't think I have much time left. If you're reading this, and you work for the Postal Service, and someone offers you a temporary assignment in Alaska with triple pay, don't take it. Some routes are meant to stay unfinished, and some towns are meant to stay empty. My name is Alex Morrison, and I've been flying bush routes in Alaska for 7 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in the remote villages around the Yukon Delta, places so isolated that when something goes wrong, there's nowhere to run and no one coming to help you. The state police told me to never speak about what I witnessed, but people need to know the truth about what's happening out there in the endless white. I should have realized something was wrong when they offered me double pay to take over the Koyukuk River route. The previous pilot, Danny Reeves, had flown those villages for 15 years without incident. Then one day, his plane was found crashed in a lake. Danny's body missing, the aircraft torn apart from the inside, like something had clawed its way out. The company needed someone immediately. Winter was coming, and these villages, Nulato, Galena, Ruby, Huslia, depended entirely on airdrops for survival. Food, medicine, fuel. Without regular deliveries, people would die. That's how they got me to take the job. Appeal to the hero complex every bush pilot carries. My first run was to Nulato, population 293. The landing strip was just a gravel road carved out of the forest, barely long enough for my Cessna 207. As I taxied to the small terminal building, I noticed something odd. No one came out to meet me. Usually villages treat supply flights like events. People gather, kids wave, everyone wants to know if there's mail. The silence felt wrong. I shut down the engine and waited. Nothing. The whole village looked empty, but smoke was rising from chimneys. People were there, hiding. I grabbed my radio. Nulato ground, Cessna 47 Alpha on the ground with supplies. Static. Then a voice, barely a whisper. Leave the cargo and go. Don't stay after dark. Come again? I said, leave the cargo and get out. Please. I'd never heard fear like that in a voice before. Raw, primal terror. I unloaded quickly, stacking boxes of food and medical supplies on the tarmac. The whole time I felt eyes watching me from the windows of houses, but I never saw a face. As I was securing the cargo bay, an elderly native woman emerged from the tree line. She moved quickly, glancing over her shoulder like something was following her. You the new pilot? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Alex Morrison. My name's Sarah Pitka. I knew Danny. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You need to know what happened to him. She handed me a manila envelope. Don't open it until you're airborne. And whatever you do, don't fly at night. Never at night. Before I could ask questions, she melted back into the trees like a ghost. I took off immediately, climbing fast to get away from whatever had spooked an entire village. Once I reached cruising altitude, I opened the envelope. Inside were photos, Polaroids that looked like they'd been taken with a shaking hand. The first showed tracks in snow around Danny's crash site, but they weren't human tracks. They were massive, at least 18 inches long, with claw marks that gouged deep into the frozen ground. The pattern was wrong, sometimes bipedal, sometimes quadrupedal, like something that could switch between walking upright and running on all fours. The second photo showed scratches on Danny's plane, deep gouges in the metal fuselage, arranged in parallel lines like claw marks. But the metal was torn outward, not inward. Something had broken out of the plane, not into it. The third photo made my hands shake. It was Danny's logbook, open to his final entries. His normally neat handwriting became increasingly erratic over his last week of flights. Asterisk, Day 1, villagers in Ruby acting strange. Won't make eye contact. Asterisk, asterisk. Day 3, saw large shapes moving between houses at dusk. Too big to be people. Asterisk, asterisk. Day 5, radio chatter about missing children. Families leaving in the night. Asterisk, asterisk. Day 7, they're following the plane, can see them running below. The tree line? Asterisk, asterisk. Final entry, they can fly. Asterisk, I radioed Bethel Flight Service immediately. Bethel Radio, need to speak with base operations about the Koyukuk route safety protocols. Standby 47 Alpha. The supervisor, Jim Walsh, came on frequency. Alex, what's the problem? Jim, I need to know more about Danny Reeves' accident. The villages are scared of something, and I think... Negative. Danny crashed due to spatial disorientation and bad weather. Case closed. Continue your route as scheduled. But I could hear it in his voice. The same fear I'd heard from the woman in Nulato. He knew something. My next stop was Galena. Bigger town, about 500 people, with a proper runway and tower. But as I approached, the tower was silent. I called repeatedly, no response. The windsock hung limp, and I could see the control tower was dark. I landed anyway, had to. I was carrying insulin for a diabetic child. The terminal building was empty, but unlocked. Fresh, coffee in the pot, still warm. Computer monitors glowing, showing normal weather data. But no people. It was like everyone had vanished mid-task. I found the medical supplies delivery address and drove the small terminal truck through empty streets. Houses stood open, doors swinging in the wind. Cars parked normally, some still running. Fresh laundry frozen on clotheslines. The house I needed was on the edge of town. A woman answered the door. Young, maybe 30, holding a small boy who looked pale and sickly. You brought Tommy's medicine? She asked, but her eyes kept darting to the forest behind me. Yes, ma'am. What happened here? Where is everyone? They came in the night, she whispered. Started 3 weeks ago. First it was just sounds in the forest. Then people started seeing them at the edge of town, big shapes moving between the trees. Seeing what? We don't know, but they're learning. First they just watched. Then they started copying us, walking, upright, making sounds like human voices. Tommy's father went to investigate last week. Her voice broke. He came back, but it wasn't him anymore. What do you mean? He looked like David, sounded like David, but he moved wrong. And his eyes, she shuddered. They were too bright, like they glowed in the dark. And he was hungry, always hungry. Ate everything we had, then started looking at Tommy like he was next. I felt ice forming in my stomach. Where is he now? Gone with the others. They all left together 2 nights ago. Walked into the forest in a line, perfectly silent. Even the children didn't cry. She pressed the insulin into her son's hands. We're leaving tomorrow, flying to Anchorage if we can get a ticket. Take this flight, I said immediately. I'll make room. But she shook her head. They only travel at night. We'll be safe until sunset. But you need to leave. Now, before they smell you. Smell me? They know pilots. They want what Danny had, what all pilots have, which is the ability to leave. I got back to my plane fast, but not fast enough. As I was doing my pre-flight check, I heard it. A sound like human voices, but wrong. Too many speaking in perfect unison, saying words I couldn't quite make out. The sound was coming from the forest, growing closer. I rushed through my startup procedure, hands shaking as I engaged the engine. The voices were getting louder, clearer. They were calling my name. Alex, Alex, come see. Alex. But there were dozens of voices, all slightly different, like a choir of people who had learned to speak by mimicking recordings. Some were higher, some lower, but they all had the same inhuman quality, too precise, too perfect. I started my takeoff roll just as shapes began emerging from the tree line. In my peripheral vision, I caught glimpses of things that might have been human from a distance, but moved with the fluid, predatory grace of animals. They ran toward the runway with impossible speed, their voices now changing to screams of frustration. As I lifted off, I looked down and saw them clearly for the first time. They stood upright like people, but they were too tall, too thin. Their arms hung past their knees, ending in hands with too many fingers. And their faces, God, their faces were almost human. Almost. Like someone had tried to sculpt people from memory, but gotten the proportions slightly wrong. The worst part was their eyes, bright, luminous, and completely focused on my aircraft, with an intelligence that was undeniably real. I climbed fast, putting distance between me and whatever was hunting in Galena, but I could still hear them. Even at 3,000 feet, even over the roar of my engine, their voices carried on the wind. Alex, come back. Alex, we're hungry. I radioed for emergency assistance, but the response chilled me to the bone. Jim Walsh's voice came back immediately, too quickly, like he'd been waiting for my call. 47 Alpha, we show normal conditions at Galena. Continue to next destination. Jim, the town is empty. There are things in the forest that negative 47 Alpha. Galena reported normal operations this morning. You must be experiencing stress-related hallucinations, common in bush pilots. Continue your route. But his voice was different. The same, perfect, too precise quality I'd heard from the creatures. And in the background, I could hear other voices whispering in unison. That's when I understood. They hadn't just taken the villagers. They'd taken the flight service station too. They were coordinating, learning, spreading, and they were using the radio system to track every aircraft in the region. I switched off my radio and changed course, heading for the nearest major airport at Fairbanks. But as I flew over the forest below, I could see them. Hundreds of shapes moving through the trees in organized patterns. Following my flight path, they were herding me, driving me towards something. The fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should. Impossible, but true. Either my fuel system was compromised or the instrument was lying. Either way, I had maybe an hour of flight time left. That's when I saw Huzlia ahead. Another village on my route, and my last chance for fuel. The runway looked normal, the village quiet but not abandoned like Galena. Smoke from chimneys, normal activity. I had no choice. I had to land. As I touched down, I noticed people coming out to meet me. Normal behavior. Families with children, elderly folks, everyone smiling and waving. For a moment, I felt relief flooding through me. Then I noticed their eyes. Every single person had the same bright, luminous gaze, and they all moved with the same fluid, predatory grace I'd seen in Galena. The entire village had been replaced. I kept the engine running as they approached the plane. A man who looked like he might be the village leader stepped forward, his too wide smile revealing teeth that were too sharp. "Welcome to Huzlia, Alex," he said in that perfect, inhuman voice. "We've been waiting for you. How do you know my name? We know many things now. We've learned so much from our new friends." He gestured to the crowd behind him, and I realized they weren't all native Alaskans. I recognized faces from Galena, from Nulato. People I'd seen in other villages, all with the same bright eyes and predatory grace. "We understand you provide a valuable service," the leader continued. "Transportation, connection between communities. We would like to expand our community." More shapes were emerging from the forest around the airstrip. Dozens of them, moving in perfect coordination. They weren't just taking over existing villages, they were building something larger. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your plane, your routes, your knowledge of where the isolated people live." His smile widened impossibly. "And eventually, your shape. You've seen how well we adapt." I pushed the throttles forward, starting my takeoff roll while they were still talking. But they were fast, impossibly fast. Several of them reached the plane before I gained enough speed, grabbing onto the landing gear and wings. The aircraft shuddered under their weight, struggling to lift off. I could hear them on the fuselage, clawing at the metal, trying to find a way inside. One of them managed to grab onto the passenger door handle. I rolled the aircraft violently to the left, using G-forces to shake them loose. Most fell away, but I could still hear scratching on the roof. Something was still up there. At 500 feet, I rolled inverted and pulled negative Gs. Whatever was on top of the plane let go with a shriek of rage that I heard even over the engine noise. I leveled out and climbed for altitude, but my problems were just the beginning. The fuel gauge now showed less than 15 minutes remaining. The nearest major airport was 40 minutes away. And below me, I could see them spreading out through the forest in organized patterns, tracking my movement. They had learned to hunt aircraft. That's when I remembered Sarah Pitka's warning. Don't fly at night. The sun was setting, and in the growing darkness below, hundreds of bright eyes were looking up at me with patient, intelligent hunger. I tried the radio one more time. Mayday, Mayday, Cessna 47 Alpha declaring emergency. Low fuel, requesting immediate assistance. The response came in that perfectly synchronized chorus. Alex, land the plane, we're waiting. We're so hungry. The voice was coming from every frequency simultaneously. They had learned to use our own communication systems against us. With 10 minutes of fuel left, I saw it, a small emergency strip carved into a hillside, barely visible in the fading light. No village nearby, just an old mining camp that had been abandoned for decades. I dead-sticked the landing, engines flaming out just as my wheels touched gravel. The plane rolled to a stop in the growing darkness, and I sat there listening to the silence. Then I heard them coming through the forest. Hundreds of voices calling my name in perfect unison, getting closer with each passing second. I found an emergency radio in the survival kit and tried one last transmission on the guard frequency. Any station, this is Alex Morrison. If anyone human is still listening, stay away from the Koyukuk villages. They've been compromised by something that's learning to replace people. It spreads through contact, through mimicry, and it's expanding. The response came immediately, but it wasn't human. Alex, we found you. Time to join the community. I destroyed the radio and grabbed the emergency beacon, activating it before throwing it as far into the forest as I could. Maybe someone would investigate. Maybe they'd learn the truth. But probably not. These things were smart, organized, and they had time. They could wait for rescue teams, replace them one by one, use their identities to call off further searches. I spent that night hiding in an old mine shaft, listening to them searching for me in the darkness. Their voices echoing through the tunnels, perfectly human, except for the hunger underneath. By morning, they were gone. But I knew they'd be back. I hiked out over 3 days, following old mining roads until I reached a highway. Caught a ride to Fairbanks with a trucker who thought I was just another pilot who'd gotten stranded. I reported everything to the state police, the FAA, the National Transportation Safety Board. They listened politely, took notes, and filed my statement under pilot stress reaction. The official report listed Danny Reeves' death as spatial disorientation in bad weather. Case closed. But I know the truth. And I know they're still out there, spreading through the isolated communities, learning, adapting, replacing, using our own infrastructure against us. I quit flying that week, couldn't risk leading them to new communities, new populations to consume and replace. Now I work in a hardware store in Anchorage, as far from the bush villages as I can get. But sometimes, late at night, I hear voices on the radio that sound too perfect, too synchronized, calling for help from villages I know have been evacuated, using names of people I know are dead. They're patient, they're learning, and they're spreading. If you're reading this and you live in rural Alaska, pay attention to your neighbors. Watch for changes in behavior, for voices that sound just slightly wrong, for eyes that shine too bright in the darkness. And whatever you do, don't trust the bush pilots. They might not be who they appear to be anymore. Because in the endless Alaskan wilderness, something is hunting humanity one isolated community at a time, and it's getting better at wearing our faces. My name is Tony Martinez, and I've been working in radio broadcasting for 12 years. I started as a production assistant at a small station in Anchorage, learned everything from sound mixing to emergency broadcast protocols, and worked my way up to hosting my own shows. I've covered everything from morning drive time to weekend programming, but I'd never handled the overnight shift until I took the job at KNOM in Nome, Alaska. The station serves remote communities scattered across thousands of square miles, and during those long winter nights, we're often the only voice keeping people connected to the outside world. What happened during my first 2 weeks at that station destroyed my sanity and cost me everything I cared about. I'm telling this story because I need someone to know the truth before I disappear completely. The KNOM building sits on the edge of Nome, a concrete bunker that houses our transmitter equipment and broadcast booth. The overnight shift runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 8 hours of playing music, giving weather updates, and handling emergency communications for villages that can be hundreds of miles from the nearest help. My booth has 4 main radio receivers, a mixing board from the early 2000s, and a computer that manages our playlist. The walls are lined with sound-dampening foam, and the only windows face north toward the Bering Sea. During my interview, the station manager, Carl Brennan, had been oddly specific about the overnight position. Previous DJs didn't work out, he'd said, not meeting my eyes. Equipment problems, stress. You seem more stable. When I asked about my predecessor, he just shrugged. Dave quit without notice 3 weeks ago, left all his stuff in the booth. Dave's belongings were still there when I started, a coffee mug with his name, family photos taped to the wall, and a notebook filled with frequency numbers and times. I thought it was strange that someone would abandon personal items, but Carl said Dave had problems with the job and wouldn't be back for them. My first week went smoothly. I'd play music, read weather reports every hour, and take occasional calls from insomniacs and night shift workers. The equipment was older but reliable. Nome in October is already deep into winter darkness, with temperatures dropping below freezing and the aurora borealis dancing across the sky during clear nights. I'd sometimes step outside during commercial breaks to watch the green lights, feeling peaceful in the vast silence. Everything changed on my 8th night when I found Dave's final logbook entry. I was cleaning out his desk when I discovered a notebook hidden behind the mixing board. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago, the night he disappeared. It was written in increasingly frantic handwriting. They're in the frequencies, the empty ones. They know my name. They know about Sarah and the kids. They want me to broadcast something. If I don't, they'll hurt them. If I do, everyone will die. There's no choice. I have to disappear. Maybe they'll forget about my family. Tony, if you read this, don't listen to the empty frequencies. Get out while you can. I should have left that night. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. At 2 a.m., I tuned to one of the frequencies Dave had listed, 162.4 megahertzes. At first, just static. Then voices emerged, speaking in languages I couldn't identify. But as I listened longer, words became clear. New voice. New broadcaster. Tony Martinez, 847 3rd Avenue, Apartment 2B. Girlfriend Jessica, Sister Maria in Phoenix. My blood went cold. They knew my name, my address, my family. I hadn't told anyone at the station about Jessica or Maria. The voice continued, now speaking directly to me. Dave thought he could run. We found him anyway, frozen in his car, 20 miles from nowhere. Hypothermia, the police said. Tragic accident. His family never knew the real reason. I grabbed the phone to call the police, but the voice laughed, a sound like radio static mixed with human vocal cords. Check the news, Tony. Dave Kowalski, 32, found dead yesterday. Mysterious circumstances. His wife and children moved to Seattle last week. They think he abandoned them. I looked it up online. The obituary was there. Dave Kowalski, radio DJ, found frozen in his vehicle on a remote road. No explanation for why he'd been driving away from town in a blizzard. We need a broadcaster, Tony. Someone to send our message when the time comes. Dave refused, so he died. You can choose differently. I should have run. Instead, I asked, what message? When we tell you, you'll broadcast coordinates. Grid locations across Alaska. Remote cabins, isolated families, small communities. People will go to those locations. They won't come back. But their disappearances will look natural, accidents, exposure, getting lost. No one will suspect the truth. Why would I help you kill people? Because if you don't, everyone you love dies first. Jessica at her nursing job at Anchorage General. Maria at her teaching position in Phoenix. Your mother in her retirement home in Seattle. We can reach them all, Tony. Winter is a dangerous time. So many accidents can happen. The transmission cut out, leaving me alone with the horrible certainty that these things, whatever they were, had killed Dave and would kill me too if I didn't comply. Over the next 3 nights, they taught me more than I wanted to know. The voices existed in electromagnetic fields, feeding on human fear and death. They'd been trapped in Alaska's ionosphere since the 1950 seconds, when a military radio experiment had gone wrong and merged human consciousness with electromagnetic energy. But these weren't benevolent spirits. They were predators who had learned to use radio waves to hunt. We were soldiers once, the main voice explained. An experimental communication project during the Cold War. The Aurora was supposed to enhance our radio range, let us communicate with submarines under the ice. Instead, it tore us from our bodies and trapped us in the electromagnetic spectrum. We've been hungry ever since. They fed on the terror of isolated people dying alone. For decades, they'd been luring individuals to remote locations using false radio broadcasts, ABB, fake emergency calls, phantom distress signals, voices of loved ones calling for help from impossible coordinates. People would drive or hike to these locations and simply vanish, their life force consumed as they died in fear and confusion. Alaska is perfect for hunting, the voice continued. So much wilderness, so many ways to die naturally. Exposure, falls, getting lost in storms, we feed, and the deaths look accidental. But we need living broadcasters to send people to us. Dave was weak. You'll be stronger. On my 12th night, they showed me what they could do. At 3 a.m., my radio picked up a transmission. Mayday, Mayday. This is fishing vessel Arctic Dream. We're taking on water 15 miles northeast of Nome. 3 souls on board, including a child. Please send help immediately. I tried calling the Coast Guard, but my phone was dead. The station's landline produced only static. Even our emergency radio couldn't reach outside frequencies. I was completely cut off. Broadcast the coordinates, Tony. Tell people where to find the boat. Send the rescue teams. The coordinates they gave me led to an area of open water where no boat could possibly survive. Anyone who went there would die in the freezing Bering Sea. But the voices of the drowning family kept pleading over the radio, begging for help, describing the child crying as water filled the cabin. I broke. I couldn't let a child die, even if it meant sending rescuers to their deaths. I broadcast the coordinates on our emergency frequency. Within an hour, 2 Coast Guard boats and a civilian fishing vessel had responded. They watched the tracking reports come in as they reached the coordinates, then nothing. Radio silence. All 3 boats simply vanished. The voices laughed through the static. No boat, Tony. No family, just our voices, perfectly mimicking human fear. But 9 real people are dead now, feeding us as they drowned in confusion and terror. Their families will never know you killed them. I tried to quit the next morning, but Carl Brennan refused to accept my resignation. Contract says 2 weeks minimum, he insisted, but his eyes held a strange emptiness. When I looked closer, I realized Carl's pupils were dilated, and he spoke in the same rhythmic cadence I'd heard from the voices on the radio. They'd gotten to him too. Maybe years ago. Maybe he'd been sending them fresh broadcasters all along, people like Dave and me who could be manipulated into helping with their feeding. You can't leave, Tony, Arl said in his flat, controlled voice. The voices need you. Alaska needs you. The broadcasts must continue. That night, the voices gave me a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Tomorrow night, you'll broadcast coordinates for a family emergency. The Peterson family, husband, wife, 2 children, live in an isolated cabin 40 miles from Fairbanks. We'll make it sound like one of their children is lost in the woods, needs immediate rescue. Other families will come to help. A whole community, driving through a blizzard to save a child who doesn't exist. And if I refuse, Jessica's shift ends at midnight. She walks to her car alone through the hospital parking garage. Such a dangerous place for a young woman. So many dark corners where accidents can happen. They showed me surveillance footage somehow transmitted through radio waves. Jessica walking to her car, completely unaware she was being watched by something that could kill her instantly. They'd been studying my loved ones, learning their routines, preparing for this moment. I spent that day trying to find a way out. I called Jessica and begged her to leave town, but she thought I was having a breakdown. I tried contacting the police, but how do you explain that electromagnetic entities are forcing you to murder people? I considered destroying the radio equipment, but the voices reminded me they could reach other stations, other broadcasters. If I didn't cooperate, they'd simply find someone else and kill everyone I cared about in the process. On my 14th night, I sat in the booth with my finger on the transmit button, knowing that pressing it would murder an entire community of good people trying to save a child. But not pressing it would murder Jessica, Maria, and my mother. The voices whispered coordinates through the static, coordinates that led to a remote valley where families would freeze to death, searching for a child who existed only in electromagnetic illusion. I thought about Dave, probably facing this same impossible choice before he'd tried to run. At 11:47 p.m., I made my decision. I pressed the button and spoke into the microphone. "This is Tony Martinez at KNOM. I'm being forced to broadcast false coordinates that will lead people to their deaths. The voices you might hear calling for help are not human. Do not respond to any emergency calls from this station. Repeat, do not respond to emergency calls from KNOM." The reaction was immediate. Every piece of electronic equipment in the booth began sparking and smoking. The voices screamed through the speakers with enough volume to shatter my eardrums. Pain shot through my skull as if electromagnetic energy was frying my brain tissue. Then everything went dark. I woke up 3 days later in an Anchorage hospital. They told me I'd been found unconscious in my apartment, apparently having suffered some kind of seizure. Carl Brennan reported that I'd never shown up for my final shifts, and my replacement had found the radio booth, destroyed by what looked like an electrical fire. Jessica was safe. Maria was safe. My mother was safe. For now. But the voices aren't gone. They're just waiting. Every electronic device I own picks up their transmissions now. My phone, my laptop, even my digital alarm clock occasionally whispers coordinates in the middle of the night. They're angry, hungry, and they know I'll never be free from them. The Peterson family is still alive because my warning worked. But the voices found another broadcaster. I heard his transmission 2 nights ago, sending people to look for a missing hiker in the wilderness north of Anchorage. 17 people responded to that call. None came back. I can't get another job in radio. Every station I apply to somehow discovers my mental health issues and rejects my application. Carl Brennan has connections throughout Alaska's broadcasting network, and he's making sure I stay unemployed and isolated. The voices visit me every night now, describing in detail how they'll kill Jessica if I don't return to broadcasting for them. They've given me until December 1st to find another radio job, or they start feeding on everyone I love. I'm telling this story because I need someone to know the truth. If you hear emergency broadcasts from small Alaskan radio stations asking for help finding missing people or crashed planes, don't respond. Check the coordinates carefully. If they lead to empty wilderness areas with no logical reason for someone to be there, it's the voices hunting. They're growing stronger, more organized. Carl Brennan isn't the only station manager they control. There are others scattered across Alaska, all feeding fresh broadcasters to the electromagnetic predators trapped in our ionosphere. I have 6 days left before they start killing my family. I can feel them in every electronic device around me, waiting for my decision. Part of me wants to run like Dave did, but I know how that story ends. Maybe I'll take a job at another station and try to warn people through coded messages. Maybe I'll find a way to destroy their electromagnetic forms. Or maybe I'll just drive into the wilderness and let the cold take me before I can hurt anyone else. But whatever happens, remember this. The voices in the static aren't trying to help you. They're not lost souls looking for peace. They're predators who've learned that the best way to hunt in Alaska is to sound exactly like the people you die trying to save. And they're always listening.